I'd hold it pretty close. Yeah, hold it pretty
closer?
close. Yeah.
There, where I can hear myself.
Yeah, so yeah, that's
That'd be
good.
better.
Right, yeah.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome back to All Saints Church, Sunday morning live here at All Saints. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. And welcome to the forum. In a few moments, we're going to be having a conversation with Edgar Perez. We are so honored to have him here as our guest. He is a historian of the Gabrielino-Tongva nation. He also works as a Native American monitor, which means he monitors earth-moving activity with archaeologists for cultural resources of potential artifacts and burial sites. And he also served 2 terms as a tribal council member for the Gabrielino-Tongva nation. Part of what we are in the midst of here at All Saints Church is looking to, in sort of the words we use, to tell the whole story in a couple areas of our life. We have 2 teams that we call Telling the Whole Story teams. One is about the stained glass windows in our church, and the other is about the land that we currently occupy. This is a way that we are living into our values of radical inclusion, courageous justice, joyful spirituality, and ethical stewardship. And we recognize that these images in the church, which are all white, only white images in the church, has had an impact that is counter to those values. We also recognize that the land that we currently occupy has a rich history, and some of how that land, how we came to be here, is contrary to those values. Part of what we believe as followers of a revolutionary Jesus is that we are called to the ministry of reconciliation. And that reconciliation has a process to it. It has a step of first self-examination, then confession, then repentance and reparation, amendment of life, and then finally absolution, which is when we declare that we are back in right relationship with each other. These Telling the Whole Story groups, the stained glass window one, which is co-chaired by Steve Williams, and the one on the land, which is co-chaired by Hannah Earnshaw, and I'm working with both of them. They're really that first piece of self-examination. We want to, in the words of Right Reverend Jennifer Baskerville-Burroughs, we want to tell the whole story so that we can write a new story. And so for the Stained Glass Windows group, that group is looking at the history of these windows, how they came to be here, whose money paid for these windows, where that money came from, who made the decisions and how those decisions were made to put those windows here. And then also really look at what have been the impact of these windows in this space. For all of us, for people of color and for white people. What have been the spiritual impact, the psychological impact? Have there been efforts to change these windows? And what happened to those? We want to learn as much as we can. And then once we have told of much of that whole story as we can, then we move on to saying, okay, well, where is there brokenness that we need to confess? And then we move on to the repentance and reparation phase, which is what does it mean to try to repair the damage that has been done? And always when we're trying to repair damage that has been done, it is up to the people who have been wounded to determine what that is. So if I hurt you, it's not up to me to determine what reparation is. It's up to you to determine what reparation is. And then we'll be having those conversations. And then there's that amendment of life piece, which says, okay, this is what we have done in the past and maybe doing now. How are we going to commit ourselves to new ways of being together to try to make sure to the best of our ability that these wounds do not happen again, this wounding doesn't happen again. For the land group, we are in that same kind of listening phase right now, and that's what brings us to this forum today. This land has a rich, ancient history, first of all, way before any human beings were on it, and for thousands of years before we as Europeans came to this land. The story of that history is important for us to know. The story how the people who used to be on this land and are still on this land, the story of how we came to occupy and be the primary occupiers of this land, it's an important story to tell so that we can know our history, so together we can look at it, so we can name those places where we have wounded and damage has been done. And then together we can look at what does reparation and repentance look like? What does amendment of life look like? What does creating beloved community look like, where all of us have the power that God has given us as our divine right? So we're going to just be getting started, and we are so grateful to have you here with us, Edgar.
Thank you.
And what you are so good at doing, and what I would love for you to just start off with is just give us an overview of the history. First of all, tell us a little about yourself, and then give us sort of the overview of the history of your people on this land.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me this morning. The quote by the Right Reverend Baskerville Burroughs was interesting. You need to tell the whole story so that you can write a new story. Our tribe has been doing that for many decades now. We've been trying to write a new story and by telling the whole story of our tribe. And I've been blessed to be chosen by our tribal council to do our research on our tribe and to broadcast our story at elementary schools at the 4th grade level, at the high schools and university level. So I'm grateful to be here at this religious institution to continue sharing our story. And as you mentioned, I'm currently working as a monitor at the various archaeological sites, which is also part of our duties to preserve and to protect our resources if they are disturbed during construction sites. So with that in mind, I'd like to share with your congregation that the legacy of the Gabrielino has been one of ignorance, innocence, resistance, adaptation, and ultimately survival. The Gabrielino tribe began, it's the innocent part of what I mentioned earlier, because decisions about their future were being made thousands of miles away in Mexico City and in Spain. And those decisions were to finally occupy the Californias, travel north from Mexico, and occupy the Californias, both the northern California and what is called Baja Sur, the peninsula that stretches from Tijuana all the way to the Cabo San Lucas at the southern part of the peninsula. And so this strategy of the Spanish Empire to expand its territory reached here in the Californias in the 18th century, around 1769. But as it impacted San Gabriel and this area, I'd like to just concentrate on this particular area and not all of the
Right.
any comments that I make regarding California Indians would be a general statement about California, but specifically I'll discuss the native people who lived in San Gabriel Valley. The strategy to take over and invade California had three elements that the Spanish Empire used. One was to establish a mission, and two, a presidio or a military outpost, and three, a pueblo. Those were the three main elements, institutions that played a role in establishing their authority here in California. The friars of the Franciscan Order of the Catholic Church arrived in San Gabriel area in 1771, and they began to become friendly with the native people here, and slowly started to convince and persuade the native people to become baptized and be converted to the Catholic faith. That began gradually, and some native people accepted the religion, and others quite, just didn't want any part of it. Those who did accept baptism and Christianity were called Gabrielinos. Gabrielinos because of their affiliation to San Gabriel, or Gabriel, the pronunciation in Spanish, San Gabriel. So we were called Gabrielinos. Another term that you might hear is Gabrielino, an I-N-O ending, and I'll get more into other names for our tribe later. But that was the beginning of impact here in this area, and a tremendous cultural change. The mission consisted of a church, housing for priests, housing for the military escorts, corrals for their animals, and that's how gradually it began to start and to establish its new authority here in San Gabriel, in the San Gabriel area. The most important part of this conversion was that the Gabrielinos were offered a place in heaven in exchange for their conversion to the Catholic faith, and their living situation would have to be changed. They would have to leave their villages and live on the mission compounds, and so there several compounds were constructed for single men, single women, boys and girls. That was the compound area of the mission. All of these dwellings and all these buildings were constructed by the native people themselves under the supervision of the missionaries. The missionaries, of course, had their tools. They had seeds to plant orchards, gardens, and vegetables. The native people also worked to establish, to plant these various elements in the gardens and so forth. This process went on maybe about 5 to 10 years of building, and then once these buildings and the dwellings were constructed using Spanish methods and tools, then it was a thriving mission itself.
Could you just sort of point the mic, point the top of the mic more closely? Yeah, there you go.
Oh, this is a better.
That's better. There you go.
Okay, thank you. And so the native people who lived in the compounds had to change their entire lifestyle. They could not leave the compound or the mission area without permission. If they ran away or became fugitives, they were violating a strict a missionary rule, and they were actually hunted down and pursued by the military and brought back to the mission compounds. And some were whipped, some were flogged in public, so that the rest of the Gabrielinos living in the compound could see that this was what would happen if you violated the mission rules. And so within 10 years, there were quite a few hundred converts to the church and living in the compounds. And there, of course, once those who were not converted, Reverend Mike, they were able to witness what was happening on these compounds, the lifestyle that was encouraged, that was forced on the native people. And there it began the seeds of rebellion. And in terms of California in general, at other missions, there were priests who were killed. There were buildings that were burned. But in San Gabriel, it's quite a different story, which I'll get into in a minute. So the priests, the missionaries, were there for conversion and for training the Gabrielino to work in the fields and the gardens, the orchards, and so forth, and to tend the livestock. That was their goal, and that was the objective of conversion, and that was the product of becoming a Catholic. In the meantime, soldiers would carry out orders for the missionaries in terms of punishment, those who ran away, those who violated rules. But in the meantime, soldiers were also sexually abusing boys and girls at their choosing. In San Gabriel, the wife of one of the chiefs was attacked by a soldier and forcibly raped. Her husband came to her defense. The soldier shot the husband dead, beheaded him, and brought his head and placed it on a stake in front of the mission, in front of the village where this couple lived, as an example that for those who didn't like what was happening, would be the consequences of your actions. We are in charge. And in my research, some of the missionaries just turned a blind eye or a tacit. It's hard to share this with you, but other missionaries would write to authorities, which are thousands of miles away, to discipline soldiers. But it never worked because California at that time was like a remote area. And the authorities were thousands of miles away. The closest presidio was in San Diego or Santa Barbara. The administrative authorities were in Mexico, in the mainland, and the main people, the main administrators were in Mexico City. So communicating from the priests, those who did not approve of the military officers' behavior, it took quite a bit of time for any communication to be addressed. Those conditions really started to impact those who were not converted, as well as those who were living in the compound. Another element another condition that started to foment a rebellion was that the soldiers and the mission authorities needed large pieces of land, large vast areas of land to pasture their livestock, cattle, horses, goats. They needed grazing area. And so the missionary authorities leased on a provisional basis lands to soldiers so that they could pasture, so that they could graze their horses and their livestock. This expansion went all the way up to the coast of San Pedro, to Palos Verdes, and there were many villages and native communities in those areas who were not converted, but they saw this expansion of all these animals that spoiled their natural resources. Their hunting and gathering seasons were being despoiled, and this they saw as being wrong. They knew nothing. They knew that there were missionaries in San Gabriel, but this expansion into their pasture, into their lands for grazing was quite an impact also. So these conditions began to really affect and impact those who were not baptized, and a conspiracy began with different villages to a plan to kill all of the missionaries at San Gabriel and burn all of the buildings, and have those in the compound be released or set free. The person who was in charge of this conspiracy was a young woman. In fact, the only North American woman to ever lead a rebellion against the Spanish authorities. Her name was Toipurina, and she was a young, attractive, by the description of the diaries and trial transcripts and journals that I've read, that she was an attractive young woman with green eyes, and she was the daughter of a chief. She was also considered well respected because she had supernatural powers or special powers, and she was a medicine woman also. So a lot of villagers really believed in her, and decided to join her in this conspiracy to come to San Gabriel and carry out the plan. That plan wasn't executed because one of the converts overheard the planning at one of the villages, alerted the missionaries, and so the missionaries then planned their own response to the strategy, which never worked. I'll tell you a little bit more about her as it affects us today. But at that time, her trial, the governor of California at the time came from Monterey and was at the trial, and she was very bluntly said, yeah, I'm involved. And I'd like to quote what she said at her trial, which is pretty interesting for us today, to show you how these conditions that I've described have had affected those who were not converted. She said at the trial, "I hate the padres and all of you for living here on my native soil, for trespassing upon the land of my forefathers and despoiling our tribal domains." I came to inspire the dirty cowards to fight and not to quail at the sight of Spanish sticks that spit fire and death, and be done with you invaders. Those involved in the conspiracy were placed in the public view of all in the compound, and of course several villagers from various areas, as far as, let's say, Azusa and in today's area, Montebello and so forth. So they all came to the church for the trial. They knew about her, and they came to the trial. She was sentenced to leave the mission at San Gabriel, and she was sent far north to Carmel Mission, San Carlos Borromeo in Carmel. And another conspirator with her was sent east. No one ever heard of him anymore. And the rest of the conspirators were flogged and whipped, maybe 15 to 20 lashes in public view. And so the rebellion failed, but it inspired a lot of Native people to think about what is Catholicism. And Reverend Mike, I personally ask, why are there shackles, chains, and whips doing with those whose duty is to care for others, and to be loving toward and work together with Native people? What are these shackles and chains doing here? Right. I mean, there seems to be kind of a major contradiction, and so. As I mentioned, there were other rebellions and missions where priests were killed, but there was never a united front because a small group of Spaniards controlled a large number of Native people in California. Within 10 years, the Pueblo of Los Angeles was established, maybe 10 years later. And so with that founding, the Pueblo, which is today the city, the metropolis of Los Angeles, many immigrants from the Mexican mainland came to found that Pueblo. So that's the other institution I mentioned of establishing the Pueblo. And so that Pueblo also brought people. That means there was more food to be produced, more pasture land for animals. And so the Native people in Los Angeles also helped the new settlers to help them with water from the Los Angeles River. And they participated. They helped those immigrants who began the city of Los Angeles, what it is today. The Spanish authority was here for over 60 years. And at that time, and at the end of that time, San Gabriel Valley became renowned and respected as a major agricultural business and trade in this part of the world. The missionaries profited well from all of the products that they sold, hides and so forth, soap, tallow, candles, all under the labor of the Gabrielino. I prefer to call myself Tongva because Tongva is the name of a woman who was interviewed back in early 1900, and she was asked, well, you're called Gabrielino. Gabrielino, what do you call yourselves?
Right.
And she said, we call ourselves Tongva, or people who, Tongva. We call ourselves Tongva because we are the people of this land. And so I prefer the term Tongva in terms of whenever I do any presentations. But getting back to the end of the Spanish a period of 60 years, around 1833. The cost of this production and the cost of this of San Gabriel Mission being called the Queen of the Missions was really on the shoulders of the native people here and at a high cost. Several thousands of Gabrielinos or Tongva died from stress, depression, diseases such as smallpox, sexually transmitted diseases. And so that was the cost for this supposed prosperity in California, and that is from the San Gabriel Mission. Mexico in 1833 declared its independence from Spain, ordered all Spanish missionaries to leave the country, took over all the missionaries' assets, all of their holdings, and declared all native people Mexican citizens. More overland expeditions of immigrants came to populate the San Gabriel Valley, which meant more land, more pasture, more food. The Gabrielinos, or the Tongva, at this point, left the mission. They were now supposedly emancipated. They didn't have to be under the authority of Spanish missionaries. And so they either went to the Pueblo to survive or stayed on the lands that were leased to the soldiers. They were called ranchos, as you know. And so these ranchos from the Spanish period provided a home for Gabrielinos. And they knew already about agriculture. They knew about animal husbandry. And so the ranchers accepted them as their own in many cases. And they lived in proximity with the ranchers in their homes and in their property. When the Mexican sovereignty took over in California, these lands were of course appropriated by the Mexican government. They were either sold to politicians or to private citizens. Vast areas of ranchos. And California is known for its ranchos and its vast areas, but all on the expense of the Tongva people. There was no land given to the native people. They were just appropriated as the new governments came in, and their survival depended on, of course, living either in the Pueblo or in the ranchos, or just leaving and living, hiding in the mountains and continuing their lifestyle. This went on for maybe, 30 years, something like that. And in 1846, the United States declared war on Mexico. That war lasted for about 2 years. The United States government ordered all rancheros to prove title to the land. Native people were not American citizens, they were still Mexican citizens. And in about 1850, the government sent 3 commissioners to discuss what was going to happen to the land here and to the California people, the native people. Those treaties that were drafted and that were written were not supported by the state legislature. They were sent. These treaties were sent to the United States Senate. The Senate rejected these treaties because the land issue was the most important of these treaties, and they were not going to give up all this land to give it to the Tongva people or California Indians. And so during the American period, things just got worse for the Tongva people. There were governors who wanted to legislate their extermination. There's documented reports which are on the state files where a lot of officials just said they didn't want anything to do with Native people, and I just wanted to get rid of them. So as far as our lifestyle today we have been organized since the 1920s. My grandparents were part of this organization. On my father's side, they were involved in petitioning for land and benefits. This has been going on since the 1920s, and currently there are 3 tribal councils who have bylaws and a constitution. And I'm part of one of them, the Gabrielino-Tongva Nation. And we've been petitioning. We have petitioned the Bureau of Indian Affairs for land recognition, not through the treaties because they were worthless, but we're starting we have begun a new petition for us to get some property, some land for housing, benefits for medical services and for education. And so that's our situation today, Reverend Mike. But getting back to one last thing about Toipurina.
Right.
A lot of now that we've shared her story to children and to high schoolers and to university students, she has become a symbol to us of self-identification and to continue our struggle for federal recognition. And sometimes you'll see some of her murals in LA and at the other areas here in San Gabriel Valley. And so she's become a symbol of strength for the tribe. And that's what's keeping us to continue this effort of federal recognition. And I was very grateful to be able to share this story with you and your congregation.
Great, thank you. First of all, I want to, for those of you who have questions for Edgar, just text in on the number that we use for our prayer text, which is 910-TEXT-ASC, 910-TEXT-ASC. I'll say that number more slowly, 910-839-8272, 910-839-8272. 8272. Just a couple questions right off the top from me. You talk about there's 3 different tribal councils. Do those represent 3 sort of acknowledged subsets of the Tongva Nation, or are they in some ways competing? You know, each one claims that like we're the true representatives of the Tongva Nations. What's the relationship among the 3 tribal councils today?
The relationship is that we're autonomous and we're independent from one another, and each one has their own tribal members. They have their own bylaws, and in terms of competition, it's not really competition. I would say that those of us who want to protect cultural resources, we have to submit a proposal to the lead agency or a contractor that has been designated, that the area has been designated as a cultural resource, and that there might be a burial site or there might be cultural artifacts. And so we don't compete with each other, the tribes. We submit a proposal to the lead agency or the prime contractor, so that contractor, that entity then decides which group will monitor or all groups participate at one time. There's been a struggle between our council, the various councils, in terms of federal recognition, because one group may want a casino as part of recognition. Another group says, no, we don't want a casino. It's bad for our community. It's bad for us. As far as those who say that there are the true descendants of the Tongva, that may be true, Reverend Mike, but yet you still have to prove to the United States government that you are, in fact, a descendant. You have to come up with documents. You just can't say, well, I'm Tongva, I'm Gabrielino. You have to prove it. So in time, that'll come out. I really ignore stuff like that until, and I don't personally ask, well, if you are, then can you show me, show me some identification. That's not necessary. It'll come down to, if you are in fact, you have to. There are certain guidelines and regulations.
So, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. My understanding is that the Tongva Nation is recognized by the state of California, but not by the federal government. Is that true?
Yes. In California, there is no process, there is no formal process of state recognition. Mm-hmm. Other states have a formal recognition status. California does not have a formal process for recognition. Our recognition comes from a legislative, a joint resolution that states that we are the original inhabitants of this area, but there is no formal state recognition.
Okay.
And the federal government still at this stage does not recognize our tribe.
Now, I understand that there is some difference of opinion in that, where some people believe federal recognition is really important and others don't want federal recognition. Can you talk about sort of the state of that with the nation right now? The
main objection to federal recognition is the amount of time it takes for a petition to go through the various agencies. A lot of those who started this petition to struggle are now deceased, and we're in the fourth, fifth generation now, and the bureaucracy of this process is what's holding us back, and the obstacles that are presented by the federal recognition process is sometimes it's just overwhelming, and with each administration, a new secretary is elected or appointed, and then they change policies, so it's always a struggle. It's always been a struggle, which has frustrated many of our tribal councils, and that's why those who don't want to follow this, because it takes too long, and it's almost impossible.
Mm-hmm. What would federal recognition, would it open up new opportunities? Are there resources that would be available to you? What's the upside of federal recognition?
Well, the upside of federal recognition is that for us, we can benefit from educational grants to our children. For example, my son graduated from UC Irvine and got a master's degree from the University of Southern California. He could not apply for any grants or loans as a Native American because we're not recognized. Right. He's in debt, and we're in debt, as other children are, as other graduates. But for the Native people who are not recognized, there is no help there. In medical services, also, a lot of people just don't want to get on state insurances and stuff, and it's very difficult for medical services, and so that would be another advantage for us. If we were given a parcel of land, then we could provide housing for the tribe. We could start a school. We could get a power plant. We could get involved in environmental issues. We could put a casino. Mm-hmm. And so all of these things, all these options are available to us.
Are there specific areas that right now the Gabrielino-Tongva Nation is focusing on, saying this land is sacred to us, it's important to us, there are various reasons that we would like this land either returned to us or to have shared access? Are there any of those projects that are happening right now?
There are some sacred sites that are being protected. There's a natural spring on the campus of University High School. Several parks are being named now. Tongva Park in Santa Monica. Mm-hmm. On the campuses of the university campuses, for example, at UCLA, there's a feature called Jazz Steps, and those steps were constructed there because a family donated the money to build those steps, but they were very discriminatory against African Americans and Mexican American people to live in Westwood, and so this didn't come out until later. So there's a goal. Students now and faculty are now in the process of changing Jan's steps to Tongva. Other universities are involved too. Which ones? Stanford University. They removed the statue of Father Junipero Serra. So they're getting back to your question. No, we don't have a specific land where we call it our own, but it's not really our land. For example, in Playa Vista, there's a Bayona Park, and it's being preserved as a Tongva site. At Loyola Marymount University, there's a section, a tribute to the Tongva people. I've been there and talked there several times, and I've seen that area where students can go and meditate. And so those are the areas that we consider special, but not sacred.
Okay. A couple more, then we're getting some questions here. Actually, let me see. Have there been any conversations, like we're starting a conversation right now, the two of us with All Saints Church. Have there been any conversations with the Roman Catholic Church, given the history that your people have with them, that look at repentance and reconciliation?
I believe so. There's been talks, recent talks with the Archdiocese. I personally have not been involved in those talks. The people who've actually been involved are the activists and the students, and the people who are in the front lines now. I'm no longer in that area anymore, as far as that's concerned. During the 1960s, during the civil rights movement, we did expose all of the lands and all of the holdings that the Archdiocese held that were on Tongva land. And we put out a list, a public list on television and in newspaper reports about these holdings, and yet a lot of the parishioners were in a state of poverty. Mm-hmm. That started back in the 1960s. I think that the tribe, that particular council I'm affiliated with, is not interested in that at this time.
So I'm starting to get some questions in. This person writes, in justice work today, it's popular to do a land acknowledgement before speaking or leading. What besides land acknowledgements can everyday people and communities do to advocate for justice and reparation for the Tongva people? What can we do?
We're in the process now of convincing high-level politicians, mm-hmm. And with the new administration, and if those in the congregation could sign a petition or a general letter from the heads of the Episcopal Church that these particular churches, the members of this church, have heard our story, that would be a great help, so that politicians can see the broad consequences of what happened here, and that there are just everyday people who understand what happened here, and it's important that in the public policy mm-hmm. is a tremendous tool.
Yeah. This is also Beckett Nicolaitis, who's part of our Telling the Whole Story group, says thank you for this discussion. This is kind of related. Edgar, can you share any ideas for what we as a congregation can do, and this is slightly different, to honor the history and to support the Tongva people at this point now? Are there real, one of the things I love about having you in this space is I'm realizing how ignorant I am of so much of the history, and you're doing a wonderful job educating us. How can we continue that? And then also, are there real needs now that Tongva people have that we can help provide, or are there ways that we can be in relationship and share with each other?
Well, hopefully when you start your services and in-person services, you can draft an acknowledgement statement recognizing the Tongva, the people, and the land where your services are held. These statements we've helped other institutions with their statement. The Academy Museum, recent establishment of the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures.
Right.
At my son's graduation, they had an acknowledgement statement just before the commencement, and there are other institutions that are drafting these statements that are actually said verbatim at the beginning of your services. That's a good start, and like as I mentioned before, that if there would be a national effort about the Gabrielino,
Right.
in terms of supporting our petition, that is at this point
For recognition,
what we can do. And of course, I'll talk to our tribal council and present the same question.
We would love to be, and as I've listened and talked with people about land acknowledgements, part of what I've heard, and this makes sense to me, is that land acknowledgements are great, and if we're going to acknowledge that we are occupying land that was forcibly taken from and others were forcibly pushed off of, it's not enough just to acknowledge it. Well, then the question is, what are you going to do about it? And so that's part of why we're doing this telling the whole story process, is we really want to listen deeply and then be in conversation. And if, after that, part of what you say is, yes, a land acknowledgement would be very meaningful and important, then yes, we can do that. And then also, there's other things like you're asking, like if we can support federal recognition. You get to determine what reparation is, not us. And so I'm glad. What I love is, please if you can take that back to the tribal council and say, we'd love to be in relationship about what reparation looks like for that. We have a few more minutes. Question asked, what do we know about what Tongva life was like before the Spanish colonizers arrived?
There are accounts that I've researched and that are available, primary sources of diaries, journals, correspondence between officials, visitors who traveled here to this part of the world, military officers, naval officers who came to trade, artists who came here to describe the land. Those are available at universities and libraries, and there are also some books that are available that describe the lifestyle here before contact. They had their own religion, their own family organization, their own authorities, their own rules, and natural resources, and so those are available and to us, and which is another present, another area of discussion.
Right. I'd love to learn more about the faith life and the religion.
Before contact.
So we have a couple minutes left. Someone asked, do the Tongva people live spread out through the region, or are there areas where people live as community today?
I am one of a few families who still live in San Gabriel as part of the continuum of our tribe. Others have moved to other parts of the state, Northern California and Central California. We have maybe close to 2,000 of documented.
1,000 or 2,000?
2,000.
2,000?
2,000 Tongva, about 2,000 Tongva who are well documented and have been at our meetings, our gatherings before the pandemic, and they've come from other areas. We've received correspondence of people from Ohio, Texas, and other Western states that could not travel to our meetings, but were in fact in touch by correspondence.
That's good. Thank you. Well, this has been wonderful, Edgar. Thank you so much for your
You're
time. My hope is that this is the beginning of a conversation that will continue and deepen in relationship.
Absolutely, and
and please convey to the tribal councils that you're in association with that we are eager to have this conversation, and also that if there is ever any use of this land that the nation needs, that we would love to hear about that and offer
Thank
this
you.
space.
I will certainly do that, and we are meeting later this month, and I will definitely keep in contact with you regarding our agreement.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you
sir.
so much.
You're welcome.
Great, and thank you all for tuning in with Edgar Perez. We're going to be taking a break for a few minutes. We're going to get ready for the 11:30 service. Next week in the forum, we'll have our new Associate Rector, Mark Chase, and we'll be in conversation, and we can start to get to know Chase a little better. For now, thank you for being a part of the forum here at All Saints Church. Edgar Perez, thank you for being with us. We'll see you in a little bit. Thank you. That was wonderful.